Hi everyone, welcome to my seminar about the SNES. The Super Nintendo has a 65816 CPU, which is basically a 6502 with 16-bit-ish data register and bank switching support. The speed at which it runs depends on the memory you're accessing, and the Super Nintendo also has a famous CPU with a number of background sprites and a few neat effects, including Mode 7. It has sample-based audio, which was also quite neat at the time, and there's lots of extension chips for it, but you're not going to use those for size coding. For the toolchains, there's a whole range of assemblers you can use out there. My personal preference is CA65, but for size coding stuff, you may want to use something else. Hardware documentations, there are full SNES, which is basically a hardware reference. There's also the SFC dev wiki, which contains bit more information. For emulator, something BSNES is probably the most accurate, but the SNES emulator also has a few nice debugging features. So the ROM header, there's multiple complex ways where how the ROM file will be mapped into memory. I'm not going to explain the details, but it's if you're going to use a low ROM, which you want, because otherwise accessing the I/O registers is really annoying, so you want to use low ROM. If you use that, the file will be loaded at hex 8000, which is slightly annoying because the entry point is somewhere near the end of it, so the ROM file will have to be 32K in size with lots of zero padding at the beginning. And for the graphics, there's now 8 display modes, which offer different combinations of how many backgrounds and which color formats and how big they are, etc. Most of them are quite simple-ish, except the Mode 7, which is completely different and gives you all the transformation effects. You also have sprites and plat stuff, but those are only accessible through the DMA ports, which make them a bit annoying. There's HDMA, which gives you something like the copper on the Amiga, except slightly more limited, but it's also annoying to set up. There's stuff like the sprites, which you cannot modify during HBlank, which is not really great. For sound, you have 8 ADPCM channels using a coding scheme called bitrate reduction, but it's actually just ADPCM. It has lots of cool features. It's controlled by a separate processor, which means that you have to upload code to it within your size limit. That's going to be a pain. So for an example prod, there's the Super Keftendo by Revenant, which is Kevrons or Alcatraz bars. I don't want to get involved in the flame war, but here's it. It actually uses Mode 7 to raise. It raises the beam to put the pixels on the page, but it actually has the entire thing rotated 90 degrees in memory, and then uses the Mode 7 registers to rotate it back into what you see. That's quite neat. So that's about it. Go make an intro.